Hello, this is Martin Carcasson, Communication Studies Professor at Colorado State University and the founder and director of the CSU Center for Public Relations. This is video 2 in an introductory series of 3 videos titled kind of Wicked Problems and Why Cities, overview of the Wicked Problems perspective and deliberative engagement. So the introduction to it is on the first video that kind of sets things up a lot more. So I'm going to get right to it here, get back to the slideshow. And what this video is about the second main point I'm making across the 3 introductory videos, which is the bad news of digging into social psychology and brain science to help us understand why we're so polarized, why it's so difficult for us to have the kind of conversations we need to have. And a lot of this work actually kind of sparked from, I guess about 6 years ago now. I did a deep dive into the psychology and into the literature in social psychology and brain science to really try to understand things. This was after a particular issue that we dealt with and it was polarized when we got involved, and it was just so difficult to just get people off their positions. It was kind of a yes/no kind of framed kind of issue, which I've learned since then that's one of the big reasons that kind of caused that. Right. These are just some of the books, and I have a resource page that I developed that's in the comments on YouTube that you can gather. You can see the numbers of the slides on the bottom right. So pictures of all these books if you want to kind of dig into. This one won a Nobel Prize, and how as humans we like to think fast. We're cognitive minders. We don't want to use brain power if we don't have to, but we do have the ability to think slow. So that opens up this notion of, hey, how can we use process design or facilitation to kind of switch people from fast thinking to slow thinking? You're not smart in 46 other ways of doing yourself. He just has a brand new book that I just got delivered a couple of days ago that I'll be digging into, how your brain distorts and deceives. My favorite title, What Makes Your Brain Happy and Why You Should Do the Opposite. Jonathan Haidt's work has got a lot of good TED Talks out there, really looks at the moral foundations of conservatives and progressives, and helping us understand how do we talk to each other, what's the basis they're coming from. This is a classic book written in the 90s about dealing with misinformation, about why people hold on to bad information, even though all the research shows kind of that they're wrong. One of the questions I've always been interested in my work is this tension between democracy and expertise. And it is a tension that has to be kind of it's inherent, right? We're in trouble if democracy dominates too much or if expertise dominates too much, right? So we need the kind of this healthy balance between them. So Tom Nichols' work kind of talks about how this is a current time that we've lost a lot of the respect and the power of expertise. And Keith's book is a newer book that digs into this lately. He uses the term mind side thinking to get into kind of cognitive dissonance and confirmation bias and so forth. One key point that he makes really well, I think, strongly in the book, is the notion that for a lot of inherent biases, the more intelligent you are, the more education you get, the more you naturally start to control that. But he claims with good evidence that my side thinking, the assumption that you're really easy on your perspective and really hard on opposing perspectives, is actually something that the smarter you are, the more educated you are, the better you get at. Right? That you're basically better at cherry picking. You're better at finding evidence of your side and finding flaws in the other side of the argument. And that's a really dangerous thing, because some of the most kind of educated people sometimes can kind of fall for this even more. Right? So if you're interested in these next kind of 20 minutes or so, I've got a short paper I wrote for National Civic Review that kind of reviews it. It'll be in the resource thing. I also have a longer report I did for Kettering Foundation that you can email me. I'm happy to kind of share that with you email if you want to dig into the weeds and all the kind of sources. Though, that was about 5 years ago. So I've got a file about this thick that I'm going to try to get to this summer to kind of update that going through. A lot of this stuff is new research that's being done because there's new techniques to research this thing. We have the ability now to look at someone's brain while they're reading something and see what part of the brain lights up. We have computers that can see how long people's eyes spin on different parts of an argument. And so they're learning more and more things about this every day. Right. But the big kind of summary of the research of really digging into social psychology, brain science, is unfortunately bad news. that we are much more wired for polarization and for outrage than we are for deliberation or collaboration. The natural kind of tendencies are much easier to trigger. And unfortunately, as we'll see, there's a lot of bad faith actors, a lot of conflict entrepreneurs that know this and are taking advantage of it and selling us kind of simple stories, right? But here are 5 kind of big themes from the negative part of the research. We will in the next video get to the positive aspects of the research. We did learn some good things. Harder to trigger, but they're there. And that's really the heart of a lot of the work that we do is how do we design processes to avoid triggering the worst of human nature that we're about to get into and actually tap in the best of human nature that we'll get into in the next video, right? But these key themes, we crave certainty and consistency. Our brains are wired that once we make a decision, we want to defend that decision. We want to protect that decision. We want to seek out more information to support that decision. And again, this is what, more intelligence and more education gets you better at doing that. Second, we're suckers for the good versus evil narrative. This is an important point that it is clear. It's an anthropological fact in some cases across all cultures, across all countries and time, that we are narrative creatures. Humans think in terms of story. We process information in terms of a story. We remember and store information in terms of story. And our favorite story is a very simple, you see the Disney villains pictured here, a very simple good versus evil story with a hero and a victim and villains. And once we decide who's the hero, who's the victim, who's the villain, it can be sometimes really hard to get us off of that. We see the world through that lens and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. One way to summarize all this is our brains are really good at getting any new information to fit within the existing narrative, rather than allow new information to challenge that narrative. So storytelling is a big part of the work that we do. And stories have a clearly have a good side and have a bad side, right? The way we learn from each other, the way we connect is listening to each other's stories. And that's how we rehumanize people. But unfortunately, very simple stories can also really work to rally and mobilize your side based on an unfair story about the other side, and stories can often divide us, right? I'll post one book called The Story Paradox that does a good job of kind of getting into that in some important way. So third, we're what Jonathan Haidt calls groupish, right? And there's, we'll talk about this next video as well, because there are 2 sides of this coin. But the reality is, as humans, we are social beings. We're actually not selfish as in individualistic. We are groupish. We're designed to be in teams. Popular culture, we hear a lot about tribalism or political tribalism. I rather avoid that term because tribal is a little bit more complicated and nuanced term in a way. So I like Jonathan Haidt's term groupish that gets at that some of the good news that we're not inherently selfish, right? This is something, again, that unfortunately, some of the worst things humans have ever done is because of this. Humans have an innate ability to see the world through an us versus them lens. A couple of resources I'll share, kind of a book called Making Monsters, right? That's just a traditional thing of defining an us by comparing us to a them, dehumanizing the them, and justifying atrocities to them. But we'll also see in the next video that some of the best things humans have done is also tied to this, right? When we expand the us, when we see the humanity, that we have a natural empathy that we can kind of tap into. So this us versus them is just something inherent to human nature that can be tapped in multiple ways. So how do we, again, use processes in facilitation to tap into it in positive ways versus the negative ways that too often we're getting tapped into, particularly in a 2-party political system, right? Fourth, and this is particularly important to me because I said it as an introductory video, I come from an argumentation background. How do people make arguments, process arguments, evaluate arguments? And because of these first 3, we're really bad at the 4th one, right? We're really good at filtering and cherry picking evidence to support our view rather than letting the evidence kind of take us where we go. This one's so important to me that in my research, I really kind of dug into this quite a bit and kind of laid out a model of these stages of motivated reasoning. And the concept of motivated reasoning is that we're motivated to think in a certain way. We like to think we're motivated for accuracy or for truth or for goodness, right? But the default of our brain is we're motivated to protect our team, right? To protect the decisions that we've already made, so we feel good about ourselves. So these stages are chronological; they kind of build on themselves. When I initially developed this about 5 years ago, the terms on the right side were pretty new to most people. They were new to me. Then we had the 2016 campaign, which in some ways was motivated reasoning on steroids. So a lot of these terms you're probably familiar with, right? But the first stage is, we have a lot of biases on what we even expose ourselves to. Where are we getting our information from? Who are we having conversations with? So y'all have all heard of select exposure, echo chambers, and media bubbles. Though I will say, some research pushes back on that. So sometimes the power of this is exaggerated, but certainly there is something there. And there's, a subset of the population that really kind of gets its news from just individual sources. The second kind of stage is the most important to me, right? So we're biased on what gets to our ears, and then we're particularly biased on how we process it. And that's where my side bias is confirmation bias and so forth. In this chapter, this paragraph, so this is from Jonathan Haidt, kind of summarizing Tom Gilovich. So two of the books I kind of mentioned kind of earlier. But this paragraph has kind of haunted me for the last 5 or 6 years as we've watched national politics and the extreme polarization kind of increase. But the basic idea is when we want to believe something, the question our brain asks is, can I believe it? And if we just get a little bit of evidence, a little bit, we're done. We can stop thinking. But when we don't want to believe something, the question we ask is, must I believe this? And the rules of evidence are completely flipped. I just need one little example to dismiss anything I want because it fits what I already kind of believe. And you see this in lots of different ways. And you see this, unfortunately, in the power of bad examples. Once what was seen as a conspiracy theory is now seen as potentially valid, that one belief is enough to give someone who doesn't want to believe something to believe any kind of conspiracy theory, right? Because they have the example. One time where the media was caught being biased to one side can be used to dismiss anything the media says, because they have that one good example of contrary evidence that allows them to answer the must I believe it question in the way they like. The backfire effect is another one. This is one in particular I want to dig back into because it's a newer kind of concept. And again, in some cases it might be kind of exaggerated, but there is kind of growing evidence that shows that essentially if I'm trying to convince you that you're wrong, some evidence that shows the better my argument, the stronger my sources, the more credentials I have as a source, the more it might actually backfire. Because again, your brain is looking for reasons why I'm wrong, and you're probably going to find them. Right? And once you find them at the end of the exchange, you're thinking, here comes big bad PhD with all his evidence, and I knocked it out of the park. Right? And it's just a reality that we're learning more and more that facts aren't going to save us. If the facts are on your side in a dispute, that is an advantage because facts don't go away. Right? They have a lot of longevity, but they don't have that much kind of persuasive power. And particularly if you're in a polarized environment and you're trying to kind of convince someone with facts, as you can see on the graphic on the bottom of this, they bounce off. At best, they don't really work. At worst, they actually backfire and get the people to dig into more. Now, I'm not saying we should give up on facts or that facts don't matter. I'm saying when we're polarized, facts don't work like we want them to. So my argument is, how do we change the conversation so we're not polarized anymore, so then facts can do what we need them to do, right? Next, I'm going to go quicker, but how we make attributions and tell stories. Again, we're narrative creatures, so we're remembering things and kind of putting things together in a story. Making attributions is this kind of naive psychology that we all do, is we make assumptions about motives. We see something and we make up the backstory ourselves, and we're really good at making up really good backstories for the people we agree with and really bad ones for the people that we disagree with. Right? George Bush actually got this quite well. This was the ceremony for the police officers that were ambushed in Dallas a few summers ago. But too often we judge other groups by their worst examples while judging ourselves by our best intentions. That's a very natural inclination for our brain to do, right? Then how we make decisions are biased, and even what we remember is biased. We have an availability bias. We naturally remember those examples, those anecdotes that fit our perspective, and naturally tend to kind of forget and let those reside in our memory, those that challenge it, right? So that all leads to the fifth one, which is our brains are really bad at value dilemmas, tensions, and tough choices. Now, if you watch the first video, I basically now made two big arguments. The first video is the best way to look at tough issues is through a wicked problems lens, which focuses inherently on the value dilemmas, tensions, and tough choices, because that's the work that we have to do to take on these issues. And now I've clearly made the argument that our brains are very much wired not to do that. So that's going to be a challenge. That's something that we have to figure out ways of getting people to do something that their brain's naturally not going to want to do. Right? So that's just kind of the individual, the brain science, how we're wired, why we get so polarized. Then we take that individual person and put them out into the real world. So the next model I'm really developing is what I call the vicious cycle of the exaggerated polarization. I highlight the exaggerated there because some of the good news is we're not nearly as polarized as we think. Right? A lot of the polarization is exaggerated. A lot of the polarization is manufactured. The good news, most people that do the work that I do, which is bringing people together face to face across perspective, that polarization can often kind of be melted away pretty quickly with a good process. Right. That being said, we seem very polarized, and sometimes that perception is enough reality to undermine a lot of things. So this model, take what we just did, is individually developed subconscious bias, the blinders that people have on and get stronger and stronger as they kind of find evidence that they're right. Then they go out in the real world and they have a conversation with someone with an opposing set of blinders. And it often doesn't go well, right? Another TED Talk I'll link in the resource kind of page by Catherine Schultz's work does a lot of research on how do we react when people tell us we're wrong, right? Short version, not well, right? But she goes through she talks about these 3 stages that we go through. That the first stage is this ignorance assumption. We just assume they think I'm wrong because they don't know what I know. They're just unaware. Ignorance seems like a nasty word, but it just means, unaware. They don't have the information. So we educate them, right? We share with them. We tell them why we're right, but they don't change their mind. Right. So then we have to upgrade to the second step, the idiot assumption. Right. So now they have the information. They're just not bright enough to understand the implications of why that's so clear that I'm right. Right. But even that isn't strong enough long term. Right. Maybe that person is bright in so many other different ways. It's just this politics thing that they're off on. So she argues that the third step is we go to the evil assumption. Evil is a big word here. Right. But I think really the argument here from the second to third step is we're making assumptions about motives. We're making an attribution. Our brain is basically telling us they know I'm right, but they refuse to admit it because they've got some hidden motive, hidden goal in a way. Right? When that happens, as a communication professor, communication breaks down. If you're assuming the person that you're arguing with has hidden motives, is refusing to yield to the force of the greater argument, there's no reason to have a conversation with that person. And the fact that half of our country can't have a conversation with the other half bodes really poorly for democracy to kind of continue. Third, we have what I've called the Russell effect. It's primarily from this meme from Bertrand Russell. Like most internet memes, doesn't quite get it right. In the paper, I dig in a little bit more, and there's actually a combination of quotes from 3 different people. Some recognize some aspects of this from the poet Yeats, but the overall idea is one reason the polarization seems so exaggerated is because the loudest voices are often the most polarized. People, if you're certain, if you know you're right, you're pretty willing to walk up to that microphone and be active on Facebook and have bumper stickers. If you see nuance, if you see the tensions in things, if you see the world through a wicked problems lens, there's not as much of a place for you to express yourself, right? And then on top of this, we have what Amanda Ripley calls conflict entrepreneurs. There's people, again, that are taking advantage. They probably don't believe the world is so simple, but framing the world in simple ways with the heroes and the victims and villains is lucrative to them. It gives them money, it gives them power, it gives them status in some ways. And those are often the loudest voices. So that's some of the work that we need to do is deal with that. And then we get into, once we understand how our brains work, we start looking at our institution and our processes, and we see some of those problems. So the internet, which is wonderful in so many different ways, allows me to share this video across the world. But the internet also is very much, social media in particular, designed to take some of those negative quirks of human nature and just exponentially just explode them, right? It's so easy to gather around like-minded people. It's so easy to share kind of the worst examples of the other side and the best examples of yours. And the cherry picking kind of process is just so powerful, right? That so many conversations are insulated. It supports kind of the idea of the filter bubbles, right? And then our overly adversarial political system. There's a lot of the early work I did. I won't go through all these bullet points, so pause if you want to kind of read them. But the bottom line of this slide is, once you know how our brains are wired for polarization, and then you look at a 2-party system with winner-take-all elections, you see how, unfortunately, the system really brings out the worst in human nature. And sadly, a lot of the founders understood this. You read the Federalist Papers, right? You hear Washington as farewell address, the concerns about factions, the concerns about parties, but we still kind of fell into that, right? And you see in particular kind of the third bullet point here is, we have this sad realization that this kind of zero-sum two-party kind of political kind of framework tends to reward bad arguments and punish good ones. And the issues that we're dealing with are already tough enough already that, put that lens on top of it, it makes it even worse. So then you look at the processes, and this is my longer paper really dug into is, once I understood human nature, kind of the positives and negatives, then I looked at most public processes and recognized the problems from them, of how these processes, unfortunately, don't spark the kind of conversations we need to have. So I have little sections on each of these different ways of engaging, but the bottom line is, too often we're engaging the public on yes-no issues. I can tell you, if you're having a public meeting about a specific kind of policy idea, and really the role of the public is to show up to support it or be for it or against it, they're walking in the room with their mind already made up. Their brains are off. They're there to defend their perspective. It's not going to be a useful conversation, right? So many of these processes, a public hearing, a city council comment time, all these other different ways, primarily you're providing opportunities for individual group expression. People that already have an opinion formed, already probably have their blinders on to come and express it, but basically talk past each other. Right? And that does give a lot of power to entrenched and organized voices, those that have a good email list that can keep people to show up and give an impression of a majority, give an impression of lots of voices. And the most important point, which is going to be the focus really of the third video, these processes have little or no effective interaction. People aren't talking to each other. They're not learning from each other. They're not engaging the tensions. They're not trying to be creative. So this is the problem with, I'd say probably 95% of our public processes is a poor process design, right? And then lastly, the media, particularly national media, local media, we just started a huge project a couple of years ago on deliberative journalism to try to change this. For local journalism to reimagine itself as a particularly deliberative kind of resource. But generally, if media, particularly as it's struggling with a new financial model, if they have to kind of carve out subscriptions and carve out an audience, then there's a natural incentive to give the audience what they want, which is going to be simple stories with heroes and victims and villains. And that divides us even more. And clearly our national media is, very partisan now, giving each side what they want, right? So this negative feedback loop, which just draws us more and more into polarization, have some pretty big implications. That so much of our politics just becomes anecdote wars, gotcha politics. We've developed this outrage industrial complex. Again, lots of people getting really, really rich, feeding us these negative, simple stories. There's a mean-spiritedness and a contempt to our politics that we really haven't seen before. A joy of seeing pain of the other side, of collecting their tears, which is something a little bit different. And it leads to that assumption of negative motives, that automatic assumption that, again, undermines our ability to have conversations, fuels conspiracy theories, which really are corrosive to the public, to the civic discourse. And most importantly, of all of this, we're spending so much time and energy in this game of politics that we don't have the time or the attention or the energy to take on real issues. We don't have the conversations we need to have to take on the real issues that we're dealing with. Now, last kind of slide on the second video, last of the bad news. I promise the third video is much more uplifting and positive because we do have tools to deal with this. But I do have to quickly mention, that experts aren't going to save us. There's growing arguments now, some in political science, that democracy maybe run its course, right? People are too easily manipulated. We've got 200 years of evidence in, and it kind of shows. While I agree with a lot of that, but it's not to give up on democracy. It's to change how we engage democracy. And the alternative argument of saying, give it to the expert, let's experts decide. There's some problems there as well, right? There's, again, the dangers of experts dominating too much, just as now maybe we're dealing with experts not having enough power. But experts struggle with wicked problems just like the public does. An expert, by definition, knows a whole bunch about a little bit. right? Going back to the water slide, they might know a lot about one of those boxes, but there's no expert that can tell us how to rank those boxes, how to prioritize those boxes. Experts struggle with values because you can't see them, you can't empirically kind of count them in some way. And the heart of wicked problems is engaging the values and the tensions kind of between them. So we need experts. Experts give us good information, help us make better decisions. They need to be on tap, not on top. But just that notion of relying on experts to be the ones that get us out of this, unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So that's the second video. Hopefully you'll join me for the third video, which really kind of taps into, okay, once we see the world through a wicked problems lens and we know how our brains work and how our processes don't, then we can start making the kind of changes and how do we build capacity. And in third video, we start getting into the nuts and bolts of deliberative engagement and what we're actually doing to change these conversations. Thank you.